And for you, Mom, we've found a wonderful residential home nearby, quiet, with medical supervision. You won't have to worry about a thing." My son Edward's words didn't land like thunder. They fell into the silence of our Sunday lunch like a small, perfectly polished stone dropped into a deep well. I felt not a blow, but concentric rings of cold spreading out from my very heart. My fork clinked faintly against the rim of my fine china plate. The sound seemed deafening to me, as if the world itself had just cracked. Edward sat opposite me, full of the confident concern that he, I'm sure, considered a virtue. His wife, Claire, was beaming, holding up a phone displaying a picture of a luxurious cruise liner gleaming under a tropical sun. The roast I had been preparing since morning was still steaming on the table, and the soft autumn light streamed through the window, making the dust motes dance like gold. A perfect picture, curated to the smallest detail, the perfect setting for a quiet execution. I didn't respond immediately. The protocol, you see, has been bred into my very bones over so many years. The first rule of diplomacy: never react in the moment. Emotion is a weakness, an opening your opponent will invariably exploit. I slowly placed my fork and knife beside my plate, aligning them with perfect precision. Then, in silence, I stood up. Their voices, which had resumed their cheerful chatter about the advantages of a cabin with a balcony, faded into a meaningless hum, like a radio tuned between stations. I gathered their plates, the warmth of the porcelain against my fingers no longer warming me. My movements were fluid, honed by years of practice, the hostess, the keeper of the hearth. Each step to the kitchen was measured. I was carrying not just the remnants of a meal, but the weight of their decision, the weight of my new status, a relic, to be carefully packed away so as not to inconvenience the living. In the kitchen, I turned on the tap. The rush of water drowned out their laughter, and for a moment, I felt a sense of relief. I wasn't washing dishes. I was rinsing their presence from my home. When they had gone, leaving behind the faint scent of Claire's perfume and a profound, ringing silence, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the empty street. The thud of their car door closing had a note of finality to it. Then I went to the kitchen. From the cupboard, I took out my favorite cup, not from the guest set, but an old one with a tiny hairline crack near the handle, the one from which tea always tasted better. I steeped a single tea bag. 1, not 2, not 3, not a full pot, as I always did, just in case someone were to drop by. This simple ritual, making tea for myself alone, felt like an act of declaring sovereignty. I sat down at the large dining table where we had all just been sitting, and the silence began to speak. And suddenly, I remembered Tokyo, 1978. My husband, Robert, was on the verge of seeing crucial trade negotiations collapse. The entire deal hinged on one stubborn deputy minister whose wife, Mrs. Tanaka, remained cold and distant. Robert was in despair. "Grace, I need a miracle," he had told me that night. And so, I set about creating one. For 3 weeks, I barely slept. Our entire apartment at the embassy was covered in flashcards with Japanese characters. I drank cold coffee at 3 a.m, memorizing the subtleties of Japanese etiquette and the fundamentals of the language. I learned everything I could about the art of ikebana, which Mrs. Tanaka adored. At the decisive reception, I approached her and, with a slight bow, said quietly in my broken Japanese that the beauty of her hairpin reminded me of the cherry blossoms in the imperial garden. She froze. And then, for the first time, she gave me a genuine smile. 2 days later, the agreement was signed. When I told a teenaged Edward about it later, he just nodded absently. "Neat, Mom. You really have a knack for hobbies." A hobby, not a job. not saving his father's career. An invisible contribution never entered into any official record. My fingers drifted to my neck, to the place where the silk Hermes scarf, a gift from Robert after a triumph in Paris, should have been. I remembered how, just last month, Edward, while helping me with my coat, had adjusted it with a patronizing carefulness. "Gently, Mom. It's vintage." To him, it wasn't a symbol of a victory. It was just an old, fragile thing. An exhibit in the museum of my own life. Something to be shown to guests, but not to be touched. And right then, over that solitary cup of tea, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. They weren't just planning my vacation. They were rehearsing my life for after I become completely dependent. They didn't see Grace, the woman who learned Japanese by night. They saw a problem to be managed efficiently. What a mistake I had made, applying diplomacy's cardinal rule to my own family my entire life. Always allow your opponent to save face. I had spent so long saving their faces that I seemed to have lost my own. I finished my tea. The calm that replaced the cold was a dangerous one, like the stillness before a storm. I went upstairs to Robert's study, which I hadn't entered without reason in years. The air was thick with the scent of old books and his cigars. I walked to the massive mahogany desk. My fingers, acting on their own, found a small, intricately carved flower on the side panel. I pressed it. A soft click, and a hidden drawer slid open, one that not even Edward knew existed. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a single key. Cold, heavy, from a bank box in Zurich, our diplomatic reserve fund, for the event of a coup. I picked it up. The metal seared my palm with its reality. Then I went back downstairs to the living room and retrieved my old-fashioned address book. I knew that Eleanor, the French ambassador's widow, was an early riser. I dialed her number. "Eleanor?" My voice was steady, devoid of all emotion. "It's Grace. I require a consultation. The protocol has been breached." On the other end of the line, there was a brief, knowing silence. "I'll be waiting for you tomorrow at 11. She replied crisply. "Coffee, as usual." I hung up. My final act of the evening was to take the large silver frame from the mantelpiece, the one holding a photo of Edward, Claire, and their children. I didn't smash it. I simply carried it into the study and placed it face down in a desk drawer. That night, I finally understood that they had mistaken my restraint for weakness. They had forgotten that the most dangerous rivers are the ones that flow quietly. Diplomacy is the art of saying "nice doggy" until you can find a rock. I have found my rock. I returned to the living room and walked to the glass display cabinet that held gifts from foreign delegations. My gaze fell upon a small, heavy egg made of malachite and inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a gift that had once seemed a mere beautiful trifle. I carefully took it out, feeling its cool weight in my palm, and set it on the table next to the telephone. Tomorrow, I would make another call to an appraiser of fine antiques. The liquidation of assets has begun. The next morning, I did not go to a lawyer. I went to Eleanor. Her apartment overlooks the park, and the light that filters through her tall windows is always serene, as if it has agreed to behave itself before entering. The air smelled of beeswax and old roses, a scent of well-maintained history. Eleanor, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes that have witnessed the rise and fall of governments, poured me coffee in a cup so thin I could see the dark liquid through the porcelain. We didn't speak of family. We spoke of protocol. "He declared your sovereignty a protectorate without your consent," she said, placing a single sugar cube into her cup with silver tongs. "It's an unacceptable breach." I simply nodded. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands were steady, The emotional storm of the day before had passed, leaving behind a hard, clear calm. This was not a family drama anymore. It was a diplomatic incident, and I was now acting as my own ambassador. "You don't need a bulldog, Grace," Eleanor continued, her voice quiet but firm. "You need a craftsman, someone who understands that the most significant changes are made with the quietest strokes of a pen." She wrote a name and a number on a small, heavy card. "Mr. Davies. He handles the affairs of those who prefer discretion over drama." Mr. Davies's office was on the top floor of an old, unassuming building. There was no grand sign, only small brass letters on a dark wood door. The air inside smelled of old paper and quiet money. He was a man of about 60, with a calm face that revealed nothing. He listened without interruption as I laid out my requirements, my voice as level as his polished desk. "I wish to revoke the enduring power of attorney granted to my son, Edward," I began, "and I wish to redraft my will." He made a brief note. He did not ask why. He did not offer condolences or platitudes. He simply asked, "And the new beneficiary?" "I am in the process of establishing an academic grant," I replied, "for young women studying international relations. The details will be forwarded to you once the foundation is chartered." For the first time, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, appeared in his eyes. I left his office feeling not triumphant, but corrected, as if I had finally fixed a critical error in a treaty that had governed my life for far too long. The next few days were a series of methodical, quiet actions. This was not revenge. It was a repair. I started in the garden. My roses were overgrown, choked with dead wood. I spent an entire afternoon with my pruning shears, the rhythmic snip-snip, a calming counterpoint to my thoughts. With each dead branch I cut away, I felt I was clearing space in my own life, allowing for new growth. The work was hard on my back, and my hands, protected by thick leather gloves, ached. But it was good, clean work, an honest effort with a visible result. As my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, passed by, she smiled. "Your roses will be spectacular next spring, Grace." I smiled back, a genuine smile. "I'm counting on it," I said. It was a simple, warm exchange. It reminded me that I was not withdrawing from the world, only from a toxic corner of it. My visit to the bank was next. I was directed not to a public counter, but to a quiet office with a view of the city. The private banker, a young woman with sharp eyes, reviewed my accounts. "So, you'd like to remove Mr. Edwards' name from this joint account and rescind his access as a signatory?" she asked, her tone professionally neutral. As she typed, my mind drifted. I saw a small boy, perhaps 5 years old, sitting at our kitchen table, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he painstakingly wrote his own name for the first time, Edward. I remembered the surge of pride I felt, his small hand in mine. Now, here I was, watching that same name being erased with a few quiet keystrokes. A wave of sorrow, sharp and cold, washed over me, but it did not change my course. It was a memorial to a boy who no longer existed, a mother who had to let him go. The banker slid a form across the desk. I signed it with Robert's old fountain pen. The signature was firm. I was no longer a custodian. I was the owner. The messages began that evening. A blinking red light on the answering machine. I pressed the button and Edward's voice filled the room, smooth and reasonable. "Mom, we've been trying to reach you. We're just a little worried, that's all. This isn't like you. Call me back when you get this." I listened to the words, but I heard the meaning beneath them. He was not worried. He was alarmed. Concern is a soft emotion. What I heard was the sharp edge of anxiety, the sound of a strategist who has just discovered a variable he failed to account for. I calmly deleted the message without a reply. Protocol dictates that one does not negotiate with a party that has already breached the terms of the treaty. The next day, the locksmith came. He was a young man with kind, efficient hands. He replaced the main locks on the front and back doors. The grinding sound of the old cylinders being removed was jarring, but the clean, solid click of the new deadbolt sliding into place was one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard. It was the sound of a border being secured. My home was no longer a shared territory. It was my embassy. That evening, I retreated to Robert's study. I took out a large archival box. I went through old files, pulling out Edward's birth certificate, his school reports, photographs of him on bicycles and at graduations. I did not destroy them. That would have been an act of passion, of anger. Instead, I placed them all neatly into the box. On the label, I wrote in my clearest script, "Archives, the Edward chapter." I was not erasing history. I was simply concluding it. Then, I opened my old, leather-bound address book. I found his entry. With a steady hand, I drew a single, clean line through his name and address. Finally, I picked up a brochure I'd collected from the university library. A lecture series, The New Geopolitics of the 21st Century. I circled the date of the first lecture. My future was beginning to take shape. On my way home from the market that Friday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped at the small French patisserie Robert and I used to frequent. The bell above the door chimed, and the familiar scent of butter and caramelized sugar enveloped me. I didn't browse. I knew what I wanted. I bought a single, perfect lemon tart, its meringue peak delicately browned. I didn't eat it out of the bag or in the car. I took it home, placed it on one of my best china plates, brewed a fresh pot of Earl Grey tea, and sat at my dining room table. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was peaceful. It was mine. It was the first time in a very long time I had chosen the menu, set the table, and served the meal entirely for myself, and I was finally home. It was a Tuesday when Edward came. I was in the living room, reading a biography of Vita Sackville West and sipping tea when the doorbell chimed. It wasn't the tentative ring of a delivery person, but a firm, expectant press. I didn't move. The chime came again, longer this time. Then, a pause, followed by a series of sharp, impatient knocks against the heavy oak door. His voice, muffled but clear, carried through the wood. "Mom, are you in there? I know you're home. I can see your car. Mom, open the door. This is ridiculous." I calmly turned a page in my book. The silence inside my house was a physical presence, a shield. I could hear him pacing on the porch, the scrape of his expensive leather shoes on the stone. He tried the handle, a futile, rattling sound. Then his voice came again, laced now with a frustration that was beginning to curdle into anger. "Fine. Be that way. I was just trying to make sure you were okay." I took a slow sip of tea. He wasn't trying to see if I was okay. He was trying to see if I was still under his control. The truest messages are not delivered with words, but with the absence of them. A closed door is a statement that requires no translation. After another minute of frustrated silence, I heard his footsteps retreat down the path and the sound of his car driving away too fast. The quiet that settled in its wake was no longer a void. It was a victory. With the house once again my own, I began to walk through it, not with any purpose, but as a visitor in my own museum, an inventory of a life. I paused by Robert's large leather armchair. My fingers traced the worn pattern on the velvet armrest, and for a moment I could almost feel the weight of a small boy's head resting against my chest, his breathing soft, and even as I read him stories of dragons and distant lands, I could smell the faint scent of milk and sleep on his hair. It was a memory so warm, so perfectly preserved. It ached. But it was immediately followed by another, colder one. Edward in that same chair just a few months ago, his face illuminated by the blue light of his phone as he scrolled endlessly, offering only a distracted while I tried to tell him about the results from my doctor. He was present in body, but his attention was 1,000 miles away. The chair had held both the child I adored and the stranger he had become. In the kitchen, I stood by the large wooden table. This was the heart of our home for decades. I remembered the comforting scent of cinnamon and sugar as I baked hundreds of cookies for school bake sales, his childish delight at being the first to taste them. We did his homework here, his brow furrowed in concentration over long division, but layered over these warm, faded images was the sharp, digital glare of Claire's phone from that Sunday. The gleaming cruise ship, the condescending smiles, the precise, clinical words that had severed my life in two. This table was no longer a place of nourishment, but the site of my deposition. Upstairs, I pushed open the door to what had been his bedroom. It was a guest room now, immaculate and impersonal. But my eyes found the marks on the doorframe, faint pencil lines charting his growth from a toddler to a young man taller than myself. "Look, Mom, I grew another inch," his voice echoed in the quiet room. A ghost of pride and love fluttered in my chest. Then I saw the room for what it was now, a space he hadn't slept in for over 20 years, a part of a house he viewed not as a home, but as an asset, a past he had neatly archived and forgotten. Returning downstairs, I sat at Robert's desk with a clean sheet of paper from his stationery drawer and his old fountain pen. I drew a line down the middle. On one side I wrote, "to keep," on the other, "to leave." The "to leave" column filled quickly. The heavy furniture, the guest china, the silver sets we never used. The "to keep" list was much shorter. Each item a piece of myself. My books, the garden tools, Robert's pen, the Hermes scarf, the tea set for one. It was not a division of property. It was the distillation of a life. The next day, the packing began. It was a slow, meditative process. I started with the books from my personal shelf in the study, not the dense political histories, but the biographies of remarkable women, the collections of poetry, the novels whose pages were soft with rereading. I wrapped each one in soft tissue paper as if protecting a fragile treasure. They were not just objects, they were conversations I'd had with myself over the years. Then, from its box in my wardrobe, I took out the Hermes scarf. I unfolded it, the silk cool and fluid in my hands. I saw the flash of Parisian lights in my memory, felt Robert's pride, his hand on my back. Then I felt the sting of Edward's word. Vintage, a delicate thing from the past. He was wrong. It wasn't a relic. It was a banner. I folded it carefully and laid it on top of the books, a slash of vibrant color against the quiet pages. This box held my mind and my history. With a black marker, I wrote on the side in clear block letters, "The next chapter." When the last box was sealed, I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. The empty spaces on the shelves and the gaps on the walls did not make the room feel hollow. It felt clear. A space prepared for a new resident, a new life, a story to which I had just written a peaceful and final epilogue. The days after the boxes were packed took on a new rhythm, a quiet hum of purpose. My life was no longer about maintaining a past, it was about constructing a future. I sat at Robert's desk, which now felt like my own command center, and made a call to the university's continuing studies department. I enrolled in the lecture series on geopolitics. The woman on the phone had a bright, efficient voice, and hearing her confirm my registration felt more significant than signing any treaty. It was an investment in my own mind. Later, I spent the afternoon in the garden, not pruning this time, but turning the soil in a fallow bed, preparing it for the spring tulips. The air was crisp, the sun low in the sky, and for the first time, I felt no sense of waiting. I was not waiting for a phone call, for a visit, for a Sunday obligation. I was simply here. The ache in my heart for the son I had raised was still present, but it had changed its nature. It was no longer a raw wound, but a dull, phantom pain. I realized I did not miss the man who had sat at my table and calmly outsourced my existence. I missed the idea of him. I was grieving a memory, not a person. The phone rang on Thursday afternoon, a sound so unexpected it made me start. It was not Edward's number. It was an unknown mobile. I hesitated, then answered, my voice in neutral. "Hello." "Grandma, it's Lily." Her voice was thin, hesitant, stripped of the easy confidence she usually wore. I remained silent, waiting. A diplomat knows that silence is often the most effective tool of negotiation. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she stammered, the words rushing out in a quiet torrent. "About the cruise and the home. It wasn't right. I'm so sorry." The apology hung in the air between us. It sounded genuine, but after a lifetime of reading between the lines, I needed to be sure. I did not rush to absolve her. I did not say, "It's all right, dear." Instead, my voice was soft but precise. "What specifically are you sorry for, my dear?" There was a long pause on her end. I could hear her take a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "That we made you feel like you weren't part of the family anymore. That we decided for you. That I just sat there and smiled when Dad said it, like it was a wonderful gift. And there it was. Not just regret, but understanding. A crack in the wall of their united front. "I see," I said, my voice still calm. "Thank you for telling me that, Lily. Can I see you?" she asked, the question fragile. "Yes," I said, "but there are conditions. It will be just you, here, tomorrow at 4. She arrived exactly on time, looking small and uncertain on my doorstep. It was a cold, rainy day, and I ushered her into the warm kitchen. I had baked a small batch of shortbread biscuits, their buttery scent filling the air. I poured us both tea, and we sat at the large table, the same table where the fracture had occurred. For a few moments, the only sounds were the clink of our teacups and the drumming of the rain against the window panes. I don't know why I didn't say anything. She began twisting a napkin in her hands. It just happened so fast. Dad was so enthusiastic and Mom was so happy. I listened, not interrupting. I let her speak, letting the truth of the moment find its own shape. When she fell silent, I didn't offer judgment. I offered an observation. "You wanted to belong to their side of the table," I said gently. "It's a powerful instinct, the need to be part of the consensus." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a startling clarity. "Yes," she whispered. "That's exactly it. I didn't want them to be disappointed in me." "I am not angry with you, Lily," I said, and I realized it was the complete truth. I am simply no longer able to live by the old rules. They are not sustainable. We drank our tea in a new kind of silence, one that was comfortable, not strained. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Grandma, can I come back? Can I see you again?" This was the true negotiation. Her request to re-enter my sovereign territory. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "You may always come back, Lily, but you must understand the new terms of our engagement. You are welcome here for a conversation, for a cup of tea, for the truth." but you are not welcome here for an obligation, or because your parents sent you." She nodded, a slow, solemn motion that told me she understood. As she turned to go, I stopped her. I went back to the kitchen and wrapped 3 shortbread biscuits in a clean napkin, pressing the small, warm package into her hand. It wasn't a peace offering. It was the first provision for a new journey, one we would take on a different, more honest road. After she left, I stood by the window and watched the rain wash the world clean. The house felt settled, the borders secure but not sealed. An embassy is defined by its walls, true, but they are not there to imprison its ambassador. They are there to define the ground on which new rules apply. Perhaps some doors should not be bolted shut forever. Perhaps they only need to be closed, quietly, from the inside, leaving a small, guarded gate for the envoys who learn to approach alone and to knock with a gentle hand. The morning I signed the lease was brilliantly clear, the autumn air so crisp it felt like a new beginning. I dressed with the same deliberation a diplomat affords a treaty signing. I chose a simple, well-tailored navy dress, practical but elegant, and around my neck I tied the Hermes scarf, not tucked demurely into a coat, but draped over my shoulders. It was not an accessory. It was a statement of office. The apartment the agent showed me was on the 7th floor of a building in the heart of the city. As she unlocked the door, the first thing that struck me was the light. It poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating an empty space that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. There were no ghosts here, no lingering scent of Sunday roasts or unspoken disappointments. The only sound was the distant, energetic hum of the city below. I walked to the window. The view was not of a manicured lawn and quiet street, but a sprawling panorama of architecture, traffic, and life in motion. It was a view that looked forward. The agent began her practice speech about square footage and amenities, but I held up a hand to gently stop her. "It's perfect," I said. My decisiveness seemed to startle her. Back in her quiet, leather-scented office, she pushed the documents across the desk. I unscrewed the cap of Robert's old fountain pen, the one I had packed first. Its weight was familiar and comforting in my hand. I signed my name, Grace Atherton, with a steady, deliberate stroke. This was not just a lease, it was my declaration of independence. I spent the rest of the day packing. It was a slow, almost sacred ritual of sorting and letting go. I found a small, dusty box containing Robert's collection of antique maps. I picked up one of Istanbul, the paper brittle and thin as a butterfly's wing. I remembered the night he bought it, in a tiny shop in the Grand Bazaar. He was so excited, tracing the ancient city walls with his finger, telling me how empires were built and lost on such cartographies. "You have to know the terrain, Grace," he'd said, "before you can ever hope to claim it." Now, I was finally mapping my own. I wrapped the maps in acid-free paper and placed them in the next chapter box. Then, I went out to the garden for the last time. I didn't prune or weed. I simply stood by the rose bushes, now bare of blooms, and ran my gloved hand along a thorny stem. I whispered a quiet thank you to the house, to the garden, for the shelter it had given me. Then I went back inside. A chapter was closing. That evening, as dusk settled, the doorbell rang. It was Edward. The final threads of my old life were snipped not with a dramatic tear, but with the quiet professionalism I had come to appreciate. The call came from Mr. Davies, his voice as dry and precise as a legal document. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Atherton. I'm calling to confirm that the final transfer is complete. The Atherton Grant for Diplomatic Studies is now fully endowed and operational. The sale of the house has closed, and the remaining funds have been deposited into your private accounts." He paused, and for the first time, I heard a sliver of something other than professional detachment in his voice. "From a legal standpoint, you are now the sole architect and final authority in every inch of your life. Congratulations. The words resonated not as a victory, but as a simple statement of fact, as undeniable as gravity. The next day, I took a short walk to the new post office. I slid a small, newly cut key into the lock of box number 714. It turned with a crisp, clean click. Inside was a single letter, the first quarterly report from the grants administrator. I didn't open it. I simply held it in my hand, the weight of it a tangible proof of a future I had built myself. Lily visited me at the old house one last time, on the day before the movers were scheduled to arrive. The rooms were filled with labeled boxes, creating a strange new geography of corridors and empty spaces. The air smelled of cardboard and memories. We didn't try to talk over the echoes. Instead, we sat on the floor in a patch of sunlight in the living room, a plate of the last shortbread biscuits between us. "Dad called," she said quietly, not looking at me. "He's angry. He says you've lost your mind, that you're trying to punish him." I picked up a biscuit, studying its familiar shape. "He's not angry with me, my dear," I said softly. "He is angry with the loss of a convenience. He is grieving the version of me that existed solely for his comfort. One mourns what was useful. It is not the same as mourning what was loved." Lily looked at me then, her young face full of a new, somber understanding. "I don't think I'll ever see things the same way again," she whispered. Before she left, she pressed a small, flat package into my hand. "I made this for you, for your new home." I opened it later, alone. It was a drawing, done in charcoal. A magnificent, solitary oak tree, its branches bare but strong against a winter sky, its roots digging deep and visible into the earth. It was a portrait of resilience, a portrait of me. The morning of the move, I woke before dawn. The house was utterly silent, hollowed out, and waiting. I walked through each room one last time, my footsteps echoing on the bare wood floors. I ran my hand along the cool marble of the mantelpiece where their pictures used to stand, along the doorframe in Edward's old room with its faint pencil marks. There was no pain, only a profound, quiet sense of gratitude for the life that had been lived here, for the lessons it had taught me. This house had been my embassy, my training ground, and my fortress. Now, its diplomatic mission was complete. On the clean kitchen counter, I left the full set of keys and a single handwritten note on heavy cream cardstock. It said only, "Thank you for the shelter. May your next chapter be a kind one." I walked out the front door, pulled it closed until I heard the final, soft click of the latch, and I did not look back. My arrival at the new apartment was the opposite of my departure. The air was bright, smelling of fresh paint and the faint, clean scent of the city on a clear day. The building manager, a cheerful woman named Sarah, met me in the lobby with a small, potted white orchid. "A little something to welcome you to the building," she smiled. Upstairs, the movers were already bringing in boxes, their movements efficient and respectful. The empty space was quickly filling with the familiar shapes of my chosen life. After they left, I stood alone in the quiet, light-filled living room. I opened the box labeled "The Next Chapter." The first thing I took out was my simple electric kettle. I plugged it in, filled it with water, and set it to boil the first, essential act of making a house a home. The second thing I took out was Lily's drawing of the oak tree. I leaned it against the wall on the mantelpiece where Edward's family portrait had once been. It looked right. It looked strong. The last thing I unpacked from that box was the Hermes scarf. I didn't fold it away. I draped it over the back of a single armchair that the movers had placed near the window, a slash of defiant, beautiful color in the clean, new space. My new routine was not a schedule. It was a rhythm. A few days later, while searching for a bookmark, I opened a volume of Robert's favorite poetry, and a forgotten letter slipped out. His familiar, angular script covered the page. It was written during a particularly difficult posting in Vienna. My dearest Grace, it read, I watched you tonight at the reception, navigating a room full of sharks with nothing but your wit and that unflappable calm. They mistake your kindness for softness. Never let them. Your grace is your strength, not your apology. Always be the sole ambassador of your own life. Tears pricked my eyes, not of sorrow, but of profound recognition. He had seen me all those years ago. He had known. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I baked a loaf of bread, just for myself. I felt the dough come alive under my hands, the meditative rhythm of kneading, the magic of its slow rise. The smell filled my small apartment, a scent not of duty, but of simple, life-affirming nourishment. Lily came to visit that afternoon. She found me in the kitchen, slicing the warm bread. We ate it standing at the counter, with butter and strawberry jam. We talked not of the past, but of her plans to fix an old bicycle. Our conversation was easy, grounded in the small, tangible things of everyday life. As the afternoon light softened, she looked around the sun-drenched apartment. Is this it, Grandma? She asked. Is this peace? I smiled, taking a sip of my tea. Not all of it, I said. No one gets all of it, but it is a piece of it, my piece, and it is enough. After she left, I sat in my armchair by the window, the Hermes scarf, a warm weight behind me. The city lights began to sparkle below, a galaxy of other lives, other stories. I didn't miss the echo of the big house. I didn't miss the calculated smiles or the deafening silence. I did not miss the old version of myself, the one who lived in the quiet hope that maybe next time they would truly see her. I didn't need them to. I saw myself. And for the first time, I no longer required permission to exist. For decades, the value of my life had been measured by the comfort I provided for others. The value of my house was measured by its market price and the status it conferred upon the family. When Mr. Davies called to inform me the sale was complete, I felt those two old currencies finally dissolve from my world. The figure that now sat in my account was a ghost of the past, but the transaction was not yet complete. There was one final debt to be paid, not to family, not to memory, but to the future. I took the check that represented an entire house and placed it in my handbag. It did not feel heavy. It felt like a seed, and I knew exactly which soil it needed to be planted in. My journey that day was not to a bank. It was a pilgrimage. I went to a small, unassuming building downtown, the headquarters of a shelter for women fleeing domestic crises. The director, a woman with tired but kind eyes, met me in a modest office that smelled of strong coffee and quiet determination. I placed the check on her desk without ceremony. She looked at the amount, and for a moment, the professional calm in her eyes gave way to sheer, stunned disbelief. She looked at me, speechless. This will change everything for us, she finally managed to say. This is a foundation. This is safety for hundreds of women. She looked at me, her eyes asking the unspoken question, why? I met her gaze. This is for the women who are taught that their worth is the foundation of someone else's comfort. I said, the words coming out clear and steady. It is for building their own tables, in their own rooms. I did not stay for thanks or accolades. As I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, I felt not lighter, but more solid, more grounded. I had not given away a house. I had simply reinvested an asset, transferring its value from a place of silent obligation to a place of vocal hope. My new apartment had, in the quiet weeks that followed, become exactly what I'd intended it to be, a sovereign territory with an open-door policy for trusted allies. Lily became a regular visitor. One Saturday, she arrived with a small, sturdy cardboard box under her arm. "Grandma," she said, her voice low, Can I keep this here?" Inside was a collection of her most treasured possessions, a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a folder of her charcoal sketches, a small, intricate model of the solar system she'd built. Things of the mind and spirit. "It's just, Mom keeps tidying my room. She says my things are clutter." I understood immediately. This was not a request for storage. It was a request for sanctuary. I cleared a space for the box in the bottom of my wardrobe. "It will be safe here," I told her. As we sat drinking tea, she looked at me with a wisdom that seemed too old for her years. "Do you think they'll ever, change?" she asked. I considered the question, the taste of bergamot tea, a familiar comfort on my tongue. "My dear, I've learned that people rarely change," I replied, my voice gentle but honest. "But sometimes, if they are very brave, they can stop pretending. The question is not whether they can change, but whether they will ever choose to be real." She nodded slowly, and our silence was filled with a shared, unspoken truth. Her visits were no longer about the past. They were about building a shared, authentic present. The letter from Edward arrived on a Tuesday. Not an email, but a physical letter. His handwriting on the envelope, a ghost from a past life. I opened it with Robert's old silver letter opener. The words inside were a jumble of confusion, remorse, and a self-pity that was all too familiar. "I don't understand what happened. I was only trying to take care of you. I miss my mother. I miss our life." He was mourning the loss of his role, not the loss of our relationship. He missed the version of me that made him feel like a good son. I read the letter twice, slowly and carefully, as if it were a diplomatic communique from a fallen state. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness. Only a quiet, final sadness for the man my son had become. I did not write back. To engage would be to reopen negotiations on a treaty that had already been dissolved. Instead, I folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and slid it into the bottom drawer of Robert's my desk. I was not preserving it for a future reconciliation, nor hiding it out of pain. I was simply filing it away, an artifact of a former era, its power now purely historical. My 73rd birthday began not with a chorus of dutiful phone calls, but with the quiet hum of my kettle. I made myself a small stack of lemon ricotta pancakes, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. I ate them slowly, by the window, watching the city wake up. There were no expectations, no performances, no carefully managed celebrations. There was just the simple, decadent pleasure of a meal made for myself, by myself. Lily arrived in the afternoon, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried no store-bought gift, but handed me a small, hand-bound book. On the cover, in her elegant script, it read, "A Field Guide to the Resilient Flora of Grace Atherton." Inside were beautiful, detailed charcoal drawings, the hardy rose bush from the old garden, the resilient white orchid on my windowsill, and on the last page, a magnificent, solitary oak tree. Below it, she had written, "For the woman who taught me that the deepest roots grow in the hardest ground." Her gift was not an object, it was a reflection. She saw me, truly saw me. As she was leaving, she paused and looked at me. "You seem different, Grandma. Taller, somehow." The days settled into a peaceful, purposeful rhythm. The orchid from the building manager, which had arrived with only a few blossoms, was now covered in a cascade of brilliant white flowers. I tended to it each morning, a small ritual of nurturing a life that had been entrusted to me. My old friends, Eleanor and the others from my diplomatic life, now came for quiet lunches in my new apartment. We no longer spoke of the past as a finished story, but as a source of present wisdom. Our conversations were filled with easy laughter and shared understanding. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unsaved number. "Happy birthday, Mom." It was from Claire. I looked at the words on the screen. They were like a message washed ashore in a bottle from a distant foreign land. I felt no anger, no sadness, no triumph. I felt nothing at all. I simply put my phone down, face down on the table, and poured Eleanor another cup of tea. That evening, I sat down at my desk and opened a new, empty journal, the first entry of my new life. I thought back to that Sunday lunch, to the casual, devastating words that had fractured my world. I thought of their confusion, their anger, their bewilderment at a protocol they had never bothered to learn. They wondered why I had done it. They wondered why I had chosen this solitary life. And in the quiet of my new home, under the watchful gaze of a charcoal oak tree, I finally had the answer. I wrote, "They asked what I would do with all this time, in this empty space, all alone. Tonight, I can finally tell them. I am here to remember my own name. I am here to set my own table. And I am here to keep the door open just a little for those who have learned to knock with clean hands